This is Turd Flinging Monkey for TFM News. I'm going to be responding to a couple articles from the same author about a related subject, but separated by about a year. The first article is called Who is an Adult? The Path from Adolescence into Adulthood in Psychology Today by Jennifer L. Tanner, PhD. The second article is called Was Casey Anthony an Adult? I Wish Someone Would Have Asked. Now obviously these are old, but I found these articles while doing research for a video where I wanted to present the case that women are children. These articles were so good, they tied everything up so neatly, I thought, why not just respond to the articles directly? So that's what I'm going to do. So in the first article, Who is an Adult? Dr. Tanner goes into how we define adults. Now before I get into the article, I just want to make the distinction that I'm not saying women are literally children. I understand there's this thing called reproduction and puberty, and once you become fertile and reproductive, you're not a child anymore. However, we as a society have determined that simply being fertile doesn't make you an adult. If this were the case, then 14, 15-year-old girls would be adults, but they're clearly not. We need to look at it socially, because that's how we determine who is an adult. That's how we determine what kind of rights a person has based on their adult status. So let's see what Dr. Tanner has to say about who is an adult. The article reads, quote, "Inside the walls of academia, we have been privy to the resurrected controversy, what does it mean to be an adult? The most recent incantation of this debate appeared in the mid-1990s when Dr. Jeffrey Arnett took interest in the question and started talking to 20-somethings about their experiences. Interestingly, his survey research and that of many others told us that very few young and very few old considered the things that adults do, having a job, buying a home, getting married, or having a child, indicators of adulthood. Rather, it became apparent that becoming an adult was about well-becoming. Across cultures, Arnett's findings have been replicated. Accordingly, an adult is, and let me just pause for dramatic effect, so this is the definition of adulthood we're working with in these articles. Accordingly, an adult is someone who accepts responsibility, makes independent decisions, and becomes financially independent, unquote. So this is the definition of adulthood we're working with. Again, I repeat, someone who accepts responsibility, makes independent decisions, and becomes financially independent. Keywords: independence, responsibility. All right, moving on. Near the bottom of the article, it reads, quote, "This debate between academic groups abstractly reflects our experiences in the real world. Whether or not the transition to adulthood is about the process of getting there versus being there is an important one, although not explicitly so. A great number of policies and programs are based on assumptions of age and adult status. There is juvenile court and adult court. Car insurance is based on age. Whether you go to a pediatrician or a GP for healthcare is defined by age, etc." And that's the end of the article. That's all I'm going to read from this article. The main thing I wanted to pull from this article is this definition of adulthood, which, again, I'm just going to repeat it for effect. One who accepts responsibility, makes independent decisions, and becomes financially independent. But now I want to go to the next article from Jennifer L. Tanner, PhD, called Was Casey Anthony an Adult? I Wish Someone Would Have Asked. The tagline reads, "At age 22, Casey Anthony was legally an adult, but did she act like one?" At the beginning of the article, it says, quote, "Despite public opinion, Casey Anthony was found not guilty of murdering or abusing her daughter. She was acquitted of any charge of having anything to do with her daughter's disappearance. As far as the jury was concerned, Casey Anthony was uninvolved in the disappearance and death of her baby girl. But the public is confused by the behavior of a mother who, at age 22, watched videos, had sex, and partied while she knew her daughter was dead. She told no one." Later on, it says, quote, "I wonder whether some of the confusion and outrage has something to do with her age and stage in life. What expectations do we have of a 20-year-old mother who never completed high school but said she did, who neither went to college nor got a job, although she said she did both, lived off of her parents' resources and stole money and gas from them, and had a baby at age 20? At age 22, Casey Anthony was legally an adult, but did she act like one? What does it mean to be an adult? It used to be clear, not too long ago, 20-somethings graduated from high school or college and got jobs. Soon after, they got married and had babies. After young people graduated and set up family, they were considered adults, but times have changed. Social scientists for the past decade have been debating what it means to be an adult. Some contend that there is a new stage of life between adolescence and adulthood called emerging adulthood. During emerging adulthood, individuals are self-focused. Emerging adults see the world as full of possibilities, they spend their time refining their identities, and their lives are relatively unstable as they make frequent changes in their living, work, and romantic relationship commitments. Emerging adult precedes full adulthood. Sounds like Casey Anthony, right? Someone who is an emerging adult is not yet fully adult, they are in between. The key marker of adult status is taking responsibility for oneself. Across cultures and among people of all ages, there is a relative consensus that someone who takes responsibility for him or herself is an adult. Anyone who has a child is expected to act like an adult regardless of age. Legally, Casey Anthony was an adult. Her case was tried in adult court. She was 22 and charged with murder, but what we know about her behavior indicates that Casey Anthony did not take responsibility for herself. Unencumbered by responsibilities of a job, Casey did what she pleased. She dated and had sex with multiple partners. She considered getting married, but she didn't. She didn't have steady work and she didn't have a steady relationship. She lived at home with her parents. She made very little expected progress gaining independence from her parents. She was uncommitted to adulthood. So let me just stop there and kind of briefly touch on some of the things that were mentioned here. So we have a woman who doesn't have to work, isn't expected to provide for herself, and can do what she wants. This is the picture of the strong, independent, empowered, modern feminist woman. This is the goal of feminism, is to free women of all responsibility. Let them do whatever their little heart desires and have someone else pay for it, i.e. men, or the government through men. I mean, you see this with everything. I mean, the whole fat shaming thing is about women not wanting to be responsible for the bad choices they make about their body. They don't want people giving them dirty looks or thinking they're ugly just because they are. And then slut shaming is women just wanting to just whore it up wherever they go, and they don't want to have any sort of stigma or shame associated with that. I mean, all of these things are about women not wanting to be responsible. And if you try to make them responsible, even through something like shame, making them feel bad for their bad decisions, even that is now like, there's a war on that. How dare you try to make them feel bad just because they're bad people doing bad things? How dare you? And this is the idea, is to keep women in perpetual childhood. I don't believe in this whole emerging adult thing. There is no emerging adult. You're either an adult or you're not. If you're less than an adult, you're a child. Near the end of the article, it says, quote, although Casey was on trial for murdering her daughter, it is arguable that Casey's age and early entry into parenthood complicated the perception of Casey as mother. It's possible that Casey was not expected to be the one responsible for Kaylee because the jury may have come to see Cindy and George Anthony, who were her parents, as responsible not only for Kaylee but for both Kaylee and Casey. I remember listening to Cindy Anthony describe in detail each article of clothing and the size of each piece of Kaylee's clothing that she had washed. She told the jury that she went through Kaylee's clothes 2 times a year, at Kaylee's birthday and at Christmas, to make room for the gifts Kaylee received. George told the story of Kaylee asking George, for a spoonful of peanut butter in the morning. Cindy talked about the joy of seeing Kaylee's little face up against hers on Sunday morning when she woke. George landscaped Kaylee's playhouse. Cindy worried about the pool ladder. It was apparent that Cindy and George provided for Kaylee. But never during the trial did we hear anyone discuss a daily routine or a typical week at the Anthony household. We don't know how involved Casey was in parenting Kaylee before Kaylee went missing. What we didn't hear about in this case was what happened at night when Kaylee was overtired. What happened when Kaylee had a stuffy nose and couldn't sleep at night? When the day grew long and it was dinner time and then bath time and then bedtime, when that same routine was demanded for days and then weeks and then years, who was taking care of that routine every day and every night? What happened when it wasn't playtime? What happened when it was responsibility time? In the end, when Kaylee needed an adult who was there. Unquote, end of article. So this article is basically talking about Casey Anthony was not an adult. Legally, she was an adult, but she didn't act like an adult. And she didn't act like an adult because she didn't have to. But let's talk about the larger context. Now, what would have happened to Casey Anthony, or women like Casey Anthony, if they were forced to take responsibility? And this is kind of like what the MRAs and stuff like that, and a lot of people in MGTOW as well, who push back against me when I talk about, a patriarchy. Their argument goes something along the lines of, women just need to be forced to take responsibility. But you can't force someone to take responsibility. You have to just let them sink or swim. And they're either going to take responsibility or they're going to self-destruct. Now, some people, when push comes to shove, when there's nobody around to help them, they will take responsibility. They will mature. Some people do not. Now, the question is, in regards to women, are men going to allow women to sink or swim? Are they going to allow women to fail and die if they refuse to take responsibility? No. No, they're not. Women have an out, especially if they're young and attractive. They have intrinsic value because they're young and fertile. If you have this idea that the solution is to somehow make women be responsible through whatever, there are really only two ways to affect someone's behavior. One is to use force, and the other one is to simply let nature take its course. Those are your only options. So if you're going to make women be responsible, if you're going to make them into adults, you have two options. One, we as men can take control of women and force them to be adults by putting responsibility upon them and demanding that they assume it. However, there's a paradox in that, because in order for men to do that, they would have to have authority over them, and then you're oppressing an adult. You're basically enslaving them, which is wrong. The other option is you simply let nature take its course. You refuse to help. You just let them sink or swim. You put the same expectations on women that you put on men, same as girls that you put on boys, and you just let them sink or swim. Now, because of women's natural inferiority, and I've made several videos about this. If you disagree with me, just go watch those. Women are naturally, physically, and mentally inferior to men. And because of that natural inferiority, they will fail more than they will not fail. Men are just expected to do so much. In fact, there was a video by No Holds Barred where there was this woman who was an Instagram model. And she was very popular. And in about 2 years of being an Instagram model, she had like a mental breakdown, because she realized how fake everything was, and nobody really cared about her. They just cared about making money from her because, the modeling and stuff like that, pushing product. And she had this mental breakdown full of crocodile tears about how terrible that was. Like, that's a man's entire life. She couldn't handle that shit for 2 years. She had a mental breakdown in 2 years. Men are expected to do that their entire life. From the time they're old enough to get a job to the day they retire. Nobody gives a shit about the man personally. He's there to make money for his employer, and then the employer shaves off a little bit and pays him. But men have no illusions that anybody cares about them. That's really part of being a man. The realization that nobody's there to help you. And obviously women can't take that. I mean, for a man, when you leave your parents' home, and usually men are just thrown out of their parents' home, they're told, you will get the fuck out of my house. And that's all there is to it. So the man is thrown out of his parents' home, and he knows he has no plan B. If he doesn't make it, he's going to be homeless and die. And the government won't even save him. Unlike women, if a man is homeless, nobody gives a shit. Nobody cares. Nobody's going to help you. The man has to make something happen. Sink or swim. And most men figure it out. But there's a large segment of men which self-destruct because they can't handle that. Now, are we prepared to do that for women? I don't think any society would do that. And also, I don't think women are even capable of that. Just imagine putting that kind of pressure on a woman. Throwing her out of your house. Imagine throwing your daughter out of the house, saying you will make it somehow. And imagine she was living in a society where just hooking up with a man with money wasn't an option. She had to find a job. She had to earn her own money and be financially independent herself. Marriage or having a baby and going on welfare, these were not options whatsoever. How many women would be able to step up and become adults under those circumstances? And how many women would just fucking lose it? Now, consider those statistics, whatever numbers you have in your mind. Just imagine those statistics. Can you imagine a society that would allow that to happen? I can't. Because women's ability to make babies is simply too valuable to let them to be destroyed like that. Especially if they're attractive. Now, we're talking like completely ugly skanks. I could see people, letting them fall through the cracks. But if you're a young, attractive woman, nobody's going to just let you do that. They're going to save you in exchange for, access to your vagina, but they will save you. So realistically, women have always been children and will always be children. It's simply a fact. If the word children offends you, you can replace that with emerging adults or permanent adolescents, whatever euphemism you want. They're not adults. They've never taken responsibility. They will never take responsibility. They'll never be financially independent, and they'll never make independent decisions. Because all their decisions are tied to someone else. Feminism and gynocentric laws give women more autonomy, but they still tie their lives to other people. Things like no-fault divorce, lifetime alimony, child support, all this shit like that, all this does, this allows her to be financially dependent on her ex-husband's income. She can spend her ex-husband's income without consulting with him, but she's still tied to that man. She's not independent, she's not earning her own money. And without the government there holding guns to that man's face, he wouldn't pay that money. So she requires this huge government infrastructure to extract resources from men to give to her so that she can pretend to be an adult. She could pretend to be financially independent. She could pretend to make independent decisions, but she requires the government to do all of it. So we have this whole society dedicated to making sure women never become adults. And yet, paradoxically, we call them adults and we give them adult rights and authority. And this is where we really fucked up. You want to help women because you think they're adults, but they're not. This whole concept, and you see this with, dating magazines, books, whatever, there's this illusion, this myth that women are so mysterious. Like, oh, women are just, how do you understand them? They're so mysterious. There's like these memes of this huge book, like, oh, how to understand women. It's like 1 billion pages. Women are not complicated. If you understand children, you understand women. They think like children. They act like children. So how do you control children? How do you get children to do what you want? It's very, very simple. You just make them do it. It's weird because people intrinsically understand that children, small children, are not responsible. They can't be trusted with power and authority. They require a strong parent to mentor them, to guide them, to be responsible for them. And in return for that responsibility, the children should obey the parents. You see this in every society. But somehow, when these children have vaginas and cross a certain age threshold, we throw all that out the window. And even though they're clearly not adults, and even though all these horrible things are happening in society that are all the fault of giving children too much rights, too much authority, without any responsibility, we refuse to do the common sense solution. Now, I understand any sort of reform on the system is impossible because women can vote. I understand that. Believe me. I know. When in the manosphere, if we can't even wrap our minds around this concept, I don't think there's any hope for us. I know the egalitarian brainwashing is strong. I know you want to believe women are capable of things which they are not. Everything is theoretical with egalitarians. Like, oh, well, women, we could just make women responsible. We can just do this. It's never happened. This is magical thinking. If you have no evidence of something happening at any point in history, in any culture, what are you basing that on? Just in theory, if we just make women responsible, though, you can't do that. They're not capable. They have smaller brains. They don't think the way you and I think. They have a care-based morality rather than a justice-based morality. They don't even think about the long term or what's fair. Now, one of the things that makes me different from other libertarians is I don't waste my time with things which are clearly never going to work. A lot of libertarians have like this kind of utopian idea. They pursue the perfect, even when they know it's impossible. But I see no benefit to pursuing the perfect. I look at what's available. Like, let's say we had 100 different types of societies that we could create, but 90 of them were completely impossible. Just contradicted by human nature, it's never going to happen. So we really only have 10 options. So the question isn't, can we create the perfect society? We can't. Human nature is a bitch. What we can do is we can look at the kinds of societies we could realistically create and try to create the best available of those options. Now, if you can change your thinking and understand that, gender equality is never going to happen. Nature made men and women too different. Maybe in the future we could use transhumanism to make humans whatever we want. We can make men have the babies and make women have larger brains and, eliminate these gender differences. But for right now, they exist. And they exist for good reasons. And throughout history, successful societies understood certain truths about the human condition, ways that men and women should behave and should be treated. We thought we were so enlightened and so smart and we knew everything, and, our poor primitive ancestors, how stupid they all were. And it turns out we were the stupid ones. And I'm not trying to change society, it's fucked. In the meantime, what is there to say? Women are children. They've always been children, they'll always be children. Anyway, this is Turd Flinging Monkey signing off.